This is a shortened version of a talk given to students of the School of Management of the University of Cape Town, South Africa, in March 2013. The students completed a course on system thinking, and I was asked as a guest lecturer to give some input on biometric systems theory in general, and also relate system thinking to change management based on my experience as a management consultant. My talk consists of 3 parts. Part 1, in the introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of the field of system thinking and also change management in general. Part 2 deals with the essence of general system thinking and some of the principles we can deduct from that on how to manage change. Part 3 will provide a few key concepts of biometric system theory and relate that to change management. First, about system thinking and system theories in general. System thinking is a conglomerate of concepts, models, and tools that are derived from different fields like cybernetics, operations research, general system theory, complexity theory, chaos theory, and field theory, amongst others. There are 2 generic approaches that we can observe. The one is the observation of the system's dynamics, the interaction of systems and the feedback and impact between them. And then there is the school of ideal system redesign, which focuses on the issue, how can we redesign a system? The whole field of systems theory is a very disjointed field. And as some of you observed and mentioned in the questionnaire I sent to you before this lecture, there is a repetitiveness and a lack of integration of concepts in the field of system thinking. I particularly like that one comment, quote, "There are numerous viewpoints provided by theorists regarding system thinking, and often some of these ideas are similar or almost identical, but yet remain separate to credit the theorist. It would be beneficial if the collaboration of similar ideas and models could take place to ensure a more focused understanding of system thinking," unquote. This is exactly the sentiment that I had about 25 years ago when I encountered the systems field, and I thought what is really necessary is an integration of the field. And that is how I came to participate in the co-development of biometrics systems theory as a meta-systems theory. And the way we went about it is that we looked at the different concepts, models, tools of these different systems approaches. We looked at what is the essence that each of them says and build it, often with a different language, with amendments and changes, into our theoretical framework to make them internally consistent and coherent. Thereby, we co-develop biometric systems theory. And I personally apply biometric system theory as a methodology for managing personal, organizational, and societal change. Some of my colleagues from other disciplines who participated in the co-development of biometric system theory apply the theory in different fields like psychology, medicine, technology, physics, biology, etc. I would also like to make a comment on how the field of organization development and change management in organizations is perceived. And according to some research, about 65% of major organizational changes fail, and almost 90% of interventions are not successful, say top executives. This is a really damning record of change management, and I don't think any one of us would like to go to a doctor to be treated who had a success rate similar to that. Why is it that organizational change interventions seem to be so unsuccessful? As a management consultant, I would say the answer is because of non-systemic intervention designs and management. The famous system thinker Galchadaki said once, "Patching is the name of the devil," meaning that we patch together different things without an overarching design, they will not work. Eckhoff expresses that very famously in his example that if we take the best spare parts from different cars and models of cars and put them together, we will not have the best car. Yet this is what we do in organizations all the time. We are taking one function or one part of the organization and we try to improve it. I have had clients in South Africa, some large organizations, who at the time when they asked me in to do some change management intervention, and I asked what else is going on, we found out that there were 60 change interventions with different consultants going on at the same time, not knowing anything of each other. In medicine, we have a term of iatrogenic disease, meaning one gets sick from treatment. This is exactly what the organizational development scene is experiencing. There are so many interventions, they are so incoherent with each other that the organization as a whole actually gets sick. It is therefore very important for change managers in organizations to get a coherent view of a change intervention and manage the change coherently from the organization development and change management center of the organization. So even if the external consultants asked in, they need to be managed internally. And their particular models or approaches that are brought into the organization need to be filtered by that group. Ideally, of course, an organization would manage its own organizational change, and the Biomatrix Organization Transformation Program is a program that allows them to do so. You have been exposed to various systems approaches and various models in your course. I want to provide you with my own summary of what I regard as the key concepts of general system thinking, and I will abstract some change management principles from this. There are 4 key concepts that I regard as the essence of general system thinking. That is co-production, emergence, impact, and levels. Let us briefly look at each in turn. This figure represents co-production. An issue like, for example, the education system is co-produced by numerous cofactors that are arranged here in a circle around the education system. And they are by far not all cofactors. I just merely ran out of space. Likewise, if we put in the middle organization development, we will get many cofactors. If I say what is the development of a person, many cofactors. Our marketing strategy, many cofactors impacting on that. If I'm looking at the production of a teacup and want to explore that, there will be many cofactors that co-produce this particular item. The second key concept is that of emergence. Out of the interaction and the co-production of these different cofactors, we have unique emergence. As one cofactor changes, the whole system in the middle, the, for example, education system, will change. And that particular change is unpredictable. This slide shows different problems like climate change, population explosion, poverty, resource shortages, finance crisis, disease, and so on. Each of those is an emerging problem from many cofactors. And what is important to note is also that there are cofactors to each other. So these various problems mutually co-produce each other. Eckhoff referred to this as interacting masses, and the change management principle associated with that is a mess cannot be solved. a mess can only be dissolved by redesigning the systems concerned. The third key concept is that of impact, or feed-forward feedback, systems dynamics, some of the terminology we hear in that context. If we take some of the cofactors of the previous slides and relate them to each other, we can see from these many errors that they also impact on each other. And because of that, the whole system becomes dynamic. As one little box changes, we can follow the errors, it impacts on the next box, that will change, which feeds to the next cofactor, and so on. So change put into motion in one part of that system will ripple through the whole system. Change is ongoing, it is never static. That means every system is continuously co-produced by its cofactors. The fourth key concept is that of the containing systems hierarchy, namely that a system like the planet contains different societies, human, animal, plant societies, and so on. Each society contains individual, and individual contains cells, cells contain molecules, and so on. We can also look at sub-levels between society and individuals, like institutions, organizations, different forms of groups, a diet, and so on. Even within an entity system, like an organization, we will have levels, different business and functional units, subunits, work teams, and then, of course, the individual again. Now, what do these four key concepts mean for how to manage change? If we look at co-production, the first principle that arises from that is that of multidimensionality. If we identify the different cofactors more closely, we will see that some of the cofactors pertain to society, like economic cofactors, political, cultural, others psychological, the motivation of a person, the thinking skills, and so on. Others pertain to technology, and yet others are pertaining to nature, our brain-mind functioning, or planetary issues, or malnutrition, for example. So every co-production needs to be explored in terms of multidimensionality. Very useful for our Monday morning meeting, where we explore the problem we have identified. We can look at it from a multidimensional perspective. What are the economic, cultural, political, psychological, and so on aspects of that particular problem? Or if we do a new product development, what are those different dimensions of the new product development, and so on. The second change management principle that we can associate with co-production is that the various cofactors are associated with different stakeholders. So we have economic stakeholders, political stakeholders, cultural, and so on. Two things we need to remember about stakeholders. The first one is that stakeholder is a functional concept. You in this class are not interested in me as Elisabeth as a person. You're interested in me as somebody who is knowledgeable about system theory and has applied it in praxis. It is my work life you are interested in. Here in this class, my marriage or my nutrition habits are not of any importance here. Likewise, I'm not interested in you as persons per se, but as students of systems thinking, and it is on those grounds that we meet here and are mutual stakeholders of each other. What are some of the change management principles arising from emergence? Well, first of all, emergence is unpredictable. Out of the interaction of different cofactors, we get all sorts of emergencies that we cannot foresee at the beginning. If we want to have outcomes that we share and that are predictable, then we need to formulate the emergence we want to create. That involves ideal design. Now, in order to make an ideal design effective, I need to align the stakeholders around them. In other words, I need to take into consideration their particular concerns. Ideally, they will participate in the design of that shared outcome that we want to achieve, because if we don't do that, there will be probably no alignment. And then I will need to get each of the stakeholders to agree to put their share of strategy and activity into the achievement of that particular emergence. What are some of the principles associated with impact? The first one that we can deduct from continuously rippling change is that we cannot have a linear change intervention. We cannot say step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and after I finished each step, I have achieved what I want to achieve. No, because change continues, we need to iterate. Every change intervention has to be an iteration. We have to go back again and again over the same ground from different perspectives. That is not running in circles, but it is going over the same thing again. It's going over the same thing from a different perspective with new emergence coming, so that we get eventually alignment. We look at the situation from each stakeholder perspective till we find alignment, and that cannot be done unless we iterate. So iterating in change management interventions is not a weakness, it is a systemic necessity. Another important key concept is that of self-referral. We hear in system thinking a lot about self-governance or self-referral of systems. It is a core principle of systems theory in general. And it is the hallmark of, for example, a learning organization. What we want to achieve in a learning organization is one that self-refers at its different levels and its different parts and as a whole. We will later on come back to that point again. But in the context here of impact is if a system, say a system from the external environment, impacts on me, I need to self-refer. What does that impact mean to me and how should I respond? And then I choose a particular reaction. I adapt, or I try to influence the change, or I reinvent myself. There are various ways I can react to a change in the environment. And that all needs self-referral. What are some of the change management principles associated with the containing hierarchy? Well, that of levels. It is a generic principle of biomatrix system theory that every intervention needs to be run across 3 levels. The outer level, the inner level, and the level of the self. So if I give the example of a person, if I want to change myself, I probably need to make changes in the environment. I also need to make some inner changes. I need to start rethinking, maybe I need to improve my health, my cellular functioning, whatever. In an organization, if I want to change the organization as a whole, I will need to look at the outer levels. How is the environment changing and how does it impact on me? I will also need to look at the inner levels. That is my staff. Are the staff capable of doing what needs to be done in response to the environmental change? Do they want to do that? Etc. And while we are here, it is important in that context to distinguish between the inner environment, which is a contribution of biomatrix system theory, and the system itself. The functions of an organization are part of the organization. They exist as long as the organization exists. For example, the marketing function is an inherent part of the organization and it belongs to the organization. The person occupying the marketing function is not part of the organization. They are temporarily providing a service and populating that particular function. But persons come and persons go while the function of the organization remains. The same is true for our body. Our body has different functions, the neural function, motor function, circulatory function, and so on. These functions are inherent parts of the body, and they do form levels as well. But the cells in the body are the inner environment of the body. They are independent, relatively independent, wholes in their own right, and they populate the functions of the body and bringing it to life, like the staff of an organization brings the organization to life. Another change management principle that we need to look at in the context of levels is that of paradox. Because each system, each entity system is a whole in its own right, it is unique. It is also a part of a larger whole, and as such, it is different from other parts. So we have in every situation the paradox between integration and differentiation. I'm one, as Elisabeth, I'm also many in terms of my inner environment, my cellular environment, my parts, and also I'm different from other wholes within the same larger environment or the same containing whole. So we always need to deal with paradox. When we have these either or options, should we centralize or decentralize our organization? This is a paradox. It shouldn't be an either or. We need to centralize and decentralize. The question becomes, in what area do we need to centralize or coordinate, if you want to use a different word, and which parts of the organization need to be decentralized, and in what area of functioning do we need to decentralize? Do we need freedom or do we need security? We need both. Normally, the more freedom we have, the less security we have, and vice versa. So it is not an either or option. We say in what parts of our system do we need freedom, in what parts do we need to secure behavior that is standardized. We need both. So as system thinkers and change managers, we need to learn to manage paradox. There is one more principle of general systems theory that I would like to talk about, and that is of change. It is a concept associated with time, so a temporal key concept. We call it the current versus the ideal future. The current situation at any time is brought about by decisions made in the past, decisions that responded to changes in the outer environment, inner environment, and also decisions relating to the self. This brings us to the current situation. If we carry on with the current structures, the current behavior patterns, we are moving forward into what we call a current future. It is really a more of the same. Because the environment will change in future, the outcomes that our current continuous behavior produces will not be the same as it is now. And as a result, we get different current futures, potential current futures, if we forecast where we are heading to. Now, the systems dynamics models explore the logic of the current situation. They explore how the current situation functions, and they give us possibly an insight where changes can occur according to the current logic. The second type of change, besides the more of the same kind of change, is one that is transformative. I'm saying I want to change my system, I want to produce specific outcomes in the future that are different to what my system is now. And that requires that I formulate an ideal future that I backcast from that ideal future what kind of strategies must I enact in order to move towards that more ideal future, so that I can move my current system step by step towards a different future. And this is the method of ideal system redesign. From a change management perspective, in systems that have fixed functioning, like nature systems which have a relative fixed functioning, systems dynamics methodologies are very appropriate to find out how the system functions, where one can intervene in the system. In the case of social systems, which have a great degree of freedom of behavior, we need the design methodology. The systems dynamics model merely tells us how the system functions now. So if I take as an example my own marriage, and for example if the marriage is unhappy, then the systems dynamics model of my current marriage will just show me why and how that unhappiness is created. If I want to change that and create a happy marriage, I actually have to step out of the current functioning, the current logic, and design a happy marriage. I have to formulate a happy marriage. If I don't know what a happy marriage looks like, I cannot create it. If I don't know what a successful organization looks like, I cannot create it. But once I have created that image, I can come up with all the strategies that I need to move towards that new idea. So the ideal system functions from a different logic than the current problem system. So the change management principle here is that the logic of the problem is not the logic of the solution. Analyzing the problem will not give me the solution. I have to reformulate it. Or as Einstein said, the level of thinking that brings about the problem is insufficient for creating the solution. Up to now, that was conventional system theory, although I integrated it maybe differently. I want to give you a few key concepts of biomatrix system theory. One of the reasons why I joined the Biomatrix group here at UCT is because two people, George Jarosz and Anakrion Klute, have come up with a few different concepts that allowed what I knew about systems theory to click into place in a different way. And one of them is the web of the biomatrix, or the web of life. What biomatrix system theory says is the universe is organized like a fisherman's net. Now, what do we see in a net? We see, first of all, that everything is connected to everything else. That means the principle here is connectivity, managed connectivity. The second principle here is each knot is the center of the web. I am the center of the universe. So are you. So is every cell in your body. So is every organization, every country. It's quite a powerful thought that I'm the center of the universe. If I'm connected to everything else, I'm not really a victim. Because what it means is I just need to manage my connectivity. Leadership is really managing outward, not managing what I'm supposed to do in my function. It's going beyond your functional necessity and manage outward into the environment. Another key concept of biomatrix system theory is that the web of the biomatrix consists of subwebs. The web of nature systems, the so-called naturosphere, the web of the psychological and social systems, that is the web of the psychosociosphere, and then the web of interacting technological systems. Now, from a change management perspective, one important principle is that these webs interact. Each entity system is part of all three webs, making it multidimensional. So this is our first key principle, the interaction of those webs and the multidimensionality of each system. A second principle is that there's a difference in organization between the naturosphere and the psychosociosphere and technosphere. And the difference lies in the degree of choice that these systems have. While systems in nature show relatively fixed functioning, the systems in the psychosociosphere have a lot of free will, at least in the human psychosociosphere, and can act independently according to their own ideas. So while some of the organizing principles of all three subwebs are the same, some are also different in the sense that there is more choice. And as we have discussed earlier, we need ideal system design in the psychosociosphere, while we need to understand the dynamics of interaction in the naturosphere. As far as the technosphere is concerned, we have complete freedom to develop the technologies that we want, obviously within the limits of nature. But once a technology is designed, it also has fixed functioning according to that design. Another change management principle that we can derive from these three subnets is that the web of the naturosphere has limits. Nature has limits. It has a carrying capacity. And it is up to us to design our social systems in such a way that they remain within the limits of nature. That is the carrying capacity in terms of being able to absorb our pollutants or provide us with the resources that we want in our production processes and in design of technological systems. Sustainability means that we design social and technological systems that are within the carrying capacity and within the limits of nature. If we exceed the limits of nature, then we get into the system's collapse scenario, the whole tipping point or tipping area scenarios where our systems start deteriorating, collapsing, or flipping, or changing their behavior. Another key concept of biomatrix systems theory is that of conceptual versus physical reality of systems. For example, if we have a house in physical reality that has been created through some information in conceptual reality. We had an idea how to build the house, we made a plan how to build the house. So the idea, the plans are different levels in conceptual reality, and as we shape conceptual reality, physical reality manifests. If we make a mistake in conceptual reality, for example a calculation error, our house in physical reality may collapse. We can also compare physical reality with conceptual reality and realize maybe we don't like the house, we need to make some alterations, so we first need to make those changes in conceptual reality. So there's a feedback from physical reality to conceptual reality. In terms of the biomatrix, the web of the biomatrix that we observe, the systems we observe in nature and society and so on, are the web reality of the systems. They are the physical reality of the biomatrix. Underlying that physical reality are information fields. Those are the conceptual reality of the biomatrix. For example, there's information embedded in our genes, and according to that information, which is obviously entrenched in physical reality, our body and our organisms and so on emerge or develop. If there is a change in that information field, there will be a change in the genetic structure, and there will be a change in the way our organisms unfold. At each level in the containing hierarchy of the biomatrix, the containing hierarchy of entity systems, we have different information fields. So there are also levels in information fields. Each species has an information field. Within that, each individual member of the species has its own information field. The cells in the body have their own information fields, and so on. So we can see levels of fields. What is the relevance of that for change management in organizations? Well, every organization has its own information field. We normally call that the organizational culture, and depending on how the organizational culture is, the organization will unfold. If we change the culture, the development of the organization will be different. Thus, if we change the information field of a system, its physical reality will change. And on the other hand, if we are observing physical reality, this gives us feedback about the kind of information field that gave rise to that particular system. So in other words, if we are observing physical reality, we can surmise what the values are that are inherent in the field of that system. One of the fundamental principles of biometric system theory is that there are two types of systems. As the fishing net illustrates, there are threads and knots in a net. Likewise, we can distinguish between string-like activity systems and knot-like entity systems in the biomatrix. Activity systems are all those activities we engage in at all levels. So, for example, the transport system, the education provision, my nutrition system, those are all string-like activity systems, while the planet, societies, organizations, a family, an individual, a cell in the body, an atom, a molecule, and so on, are not like entity systems. The change management principles associated with the distinction between activity and entity system is that although we use the same organizing principles, we apply them in different ways according to these two types of systems. Let us now look a little closer at activity systems and how they are organized. Activity systems link up with each other and form supply chains. They can be vertical supply chains or horizontal supply chains. In fact, the biomatrix is a web of interacting supply chains. We see, as an example, the nutrition supply chain. It runs from the sun actually to the subatomic level. We grow food on the planetary level with the light that comes from the sun. We process food at the societal level, provide food at the family level, eat it at the individual level, digest it and metabolize it and absorb it, and so on. If that supply chain is cut anywhere, then the systems underneath die. So, for example, if we have a famine in one area, that society in that particular area of the planet will starve. If we have enough food at society, but not every family can have access to it, then that particular family and its individual will suffer. Even if we have enough food as a person and eat it, there may be some blockage as to digesting it, maybe through a disease, so we cannot digest the food, and the cells and its containing systems will die and disintegrate, and the individual will die. We can also look at horizontal supply chains. For example, at the societal level, we process food, we plant it, it grows, harvests, process it, distribute it. And then at the family level, we buy it, we store it, we cook it, we serve it, and so on. At the individual level, we put it in the mouth, we chew it, we swallow it, and so on. So the horizontal and vertical supply chains interlink, or a supply chain wavers between the vertical and horizontal supply chain. The change management principle is that all activity systems need to be managed as a supply chain. So if we go back to our organization, every function in the organization is a supply chain. So if we take the IT function of an organization, they are suppliers of software, of hardware. They are being processed by the IT department, and they need to link into the customers, the individual users of the system. Or supply chains in production, we get input, spare parts, or parts, for example, which we assemble, and then out comes the car or whatever. And that links into the transport system of the individuals, of society, and so on. So we need to look at every activity system as a supply chain, and our organization is a web of interacting supply chains. Let us look at another activity system, the energy supply chain. It consists of energy generation, energy transportation, energy consumption. We could also insert storage in between. And of course, we need to look at the input production for the energy generation. We can also split it into non-renewable and renewable energy generation, and each, the non-renewable and renewable, we can further subdivide into photovoltaic, wind, biogas in the case of the renewable, or in the non-renewable we can look at atomic power, at coal power, and so on. From a change management principle, what do we need to look at in terms of managing an activity system? We said earlier that we need to manage continuity. What kind of continuity are we talking about? Well, first of all, we are talking the continuity of matter-energy information that flows along the supply chain. So, for example, if we are talking the production of motor cars, for example, there's a lot of material products that are being assembled and that flow along the supply chain to give us the output of the car. If we have a bank, then there's a lot of information relating to banking that is flowing along the supply chain. In the case of the energy supply chain, we have material inputs, and then there is a flow of energy, electricity, in that case, along the supply chain. So matter-energy information flows along the supply chain, and the output in one section needs to become the input in the next section, and so on. So the output needs to be tapped by the next section. And that tapping is illustrated by the orange tapping arrow. If you're looking at the energy situation in Europe, for example, we have lots of tapping problems, especially the tapping of renewable electricity from wind and from solar, photovoltaic. The problems here are that electricity is only generated when the wind blows or the sun shines, so it is erratic. And the second problem is that the electricity grid is operating almost to capacity. So it is very difficult to get the output of renewable energy into the grid. To support that, the policy was created that renewable electricity has priority to access the grid over the output of non-renewable. And that resulted in a booming of the photovoltaic industry, and also support for the wind energy and so on. It also resulted in increasing losses in the coal industry because they could not stop their production when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. They managed through their lobby to take away the priority of the renewable energy generation, with the result of the renewable energy industry, especially the photovoltaic industries, going bankrupt. They are now bought up by the Chinese, who have a greater vision, declaring photovoltaics as one of the technologies of the 21st century. So we have a lot of overtapping and continuity problems in the energy field in Europe, and it's probably not much different in other parts of the world. So what we need to do is we need to redesign the whole energy supply chain to ensure continuity of the meta-energy information flow from the different parts and sub-parts of the supply chain. How do we do that? We said earlier we need to do an ideal design. So we need to make an ideal design of the energy supply chain and then cascade that new purpose, the new ethos, aims, regulations, all these various aspects of the design back into each part of the supply chain. This is illustrated by the cascading back of the orange arrow tips. So a change management principle in activity systems is continuity of MEI flow and also continuity of purpose in terms of the larger overarching containing activity system. Let us now look at entity systems and how they are organized and how we need to manage change within them. If you're looking closer at the knot in a fishing net, we can see that it consists of interacting threads. So it's really only a pattern of the threads. In other words, entity systems consist of patterns of interacting activity systems. Now there's a very important message from knots that we can learn. We can take the two same strings and make different knots. A Japanese knot, a reef knot, a granny knot, for example. There are only minor differences sometimes in the way we interlace them, but the emergent properties of the knots are quite different. The Japanese knot is very decorative, for example, while the reef knot is very strong but easy to undo. The granny knot is also very strong but not easy to undo. So depending where I'm using the knot, I would use different kinds of knots. What does it mean for an organization? Well, if I take several threads, lay them parallel, and connect them on the top, we have the perfect silo structure. Or if we're interlacing the threads, then we have a matrix structure. So in other words, we can have the same threads or the same functions, interlace them differently, and we have different emergent properties. So what we are looking for is an optimal interaction of the functions within an organization, and that is determined by the organizational structure. Now, going back to the knot again, when we look at the knot in a fishing net, we see that some threads go out, some threads go in, some threads go around the knot. And what we observe in entity systems is that they have a threefold organization. They have outward-directed, inward-directed, and self-directed activity systems, or functions, as we call the activity systems in an organization. And these functions interact in a matrix manner and give rise to a three-dimensional matrix. The black arrows are our business lines, our different products and services that we deliver to our clients. The gray arrows that are vertical, coming from top down, are the different phases along the supply chain, the different phases of production or service delivery. And the orange arrow that come in diagonally are those kind of functions or activity systems in an organization that we need to hold the organization as a whole together. The corporate finance, the IT system, the HR systems, the legal systems, and so on, that ensure that the other activities function properly. Meta-energy information flows in each of those errors. We can extend each of those errors into the outer environment. So our IT system has its own supply chain of hardware and software supply. Our HR system has its own supply chain linked to the labor market, linked to universities where knowledge is provided to HR people, etc. Likewise, our production line links to our suppliers and links to the customers of our products and services in the market. So we can extend each of those activity systems into the environment, so it creates the organization as the center of a web of activity systems or supply chains. So the knot is really, the organization is a knot that links into many different kinds of environments. If you're looking at the field reality of an organization, represented by the orange dots, then we can say we have a culture that holds the organization as a whole together, that is represented by the board and the CEO on the left in the corner. But each product line has its own subculture. Each of the activity systems have their own culture. So, for example, the IT system in whatever the organization is, if I have a bakery or if I work with a university, the IT system is pretty much the same in terms of ethos, how IT functions. Likewise, electrical engineering has its own ethos field. It doesn't matter if we're talking a mine or if we're talking an electrician. So we have different industry-related information fields which interact with the field of the organization. And the organization itself and its business units are located within a particular industry. So if we talk a baking factory, then that is located within the baking industry, and there are many competitors, other suppliers of bread, cakes, biscuits, and so on. So what makes my organization different from the others is that core of that orange field that defines my particular brand and the values associated with it. So while I'm sharing some information with all my competitors, some values, some aspects of the information field are unique to my organization. From a change management point of view, again, we need to manage both. We need to manage the efficient flow of meta-energy information along each of those supply chains that are my functions in the organization. And I also need to manage the coherence of the field and the uniqueness of my specific field and the appropriate interaction of the subfields. Thus, a systemic learning organization is one that is organized as a matrix that has regular operational planning meetings and strategic planning meetings within and across the various lines and the organization as a whole, and that record the learning. And obviously, learning occurs in a self-reflective manner. How do we manage the change of either an activity system like an energy supply chain or an entity system like the transformation of an organization into a systemic learning organization? The methodology we use is the same in both cases. The grey boxes refer to the structures involved in the change, while the orange boxes refer to the procedures that we follow. First of all, we need to set up a design team. This is typically done by top management. The design team makes a change management plan that is a rough outline how they're going about the change, who would be the stakeholders that need to be involved, how much will it cost, how long will it take, the timing, and so on of the change. Then they will start with problem analysis and a brainstorming of solutions pertaining to the different systems that need to be changed. This involves stakeholder input. It can involve surveys, it could involve workshops or online participation in brainstorming. Then the output from the problem analysis and brainstorming phase is collected and collated in design notebooks. The design notebook is used by the design team to make the ideal design. Typically, an ideal design is done by a small group of people, but they use the output from the various stakeholders. They also need to be knowledgeable about how to make a design. In other words, what organizing principles of a system are. And they would follow those systemic organizing principles and build it into the design or build the design around it. Once the design exists in draft and top management gives the okay to carry on with the change, then there will be design iterations, again involving the various stakeholders, so that alignment and refinement of the design is created. Once the design iteration phase is finished, the design is accepted by the various stakeholders. An implementation plan will have to be made. That can involve task teams. It can again involve inputs of stakeholders, as well as the need by the design team to participate in that. Once the implementation plan in general and for each stakeholder has been made, the various strategies are fed through the ordinary strategic planning process. So they are implemented in the day-to-day implementation or running of the business of each function and the organization as a whole. In other words, the different strategies are cascaded from the strategic plan into the operational plan. They are implemented. Their performance is evaluated. If necessary, there's replanning, and there could be feedback to changing the design or amending the design or amending the implementation plan or the individual strategic plan. So the plan, implement, evaluate is what we normally refer to as the performance management cycle in an organization. The change is filtered through each planning forum into its relevant strategic plan, and depending on the nature of the change, it could also involve the setting up of planning forums, and that could require transformation teams. If we look in summary on the whole slide, we see a lot of errors and boxes. So what the principle underlying the change management methodology is, it is iterative in nature. Although we have a seemingly linear process ranging from doing a plan, problem analysis, design iterations, implementation plan, implementation, there is a lot of feedback loops between the various phases of the change management process involved, and it proceeds in iterative nature. We can also much later, when we already have the design, come up with some new problems that we have overlooked at the beginning and make another iteration around it. So the important change management principle is always iteration and self-referral, as we said earlier, by the systems concerned. In other words, self-referral by each stakeholder of what the design means to them, what they need to do in order to bring about the design. And in the last performance management cycle, also evaluate, did we actually achieve what we want to achieve? Do we need to change either the design or the implementation plan or our strategic plan? So iteration, iteration, iteration. Thank you.